At the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars will the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watch, where so gallantly stream, and the rockets red glare, the moon's bursting, and through the night, that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled and o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. God bless you all.
Order, halt. Order, halt.
Now we're going to do the pledge.
Present, halt. Present, and halt.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible.
Order, halt. Order, halt. Order, halt. Flag up straight. Left, down.
Left turn.
That's that forward mark. Branches fall out.
Or do you want to do that later?
I'll bring them over. Okay. Line up over here for this presentation of the wreath.
There's going to be a presentation of the VVI wreath.
Detail. And put. Wreath carry. Welcome home. That wreath, even though your belong to our organization, belongs to all of you, whether you're a Vietnam veteran or what, because there's all brothers and sisters then, and will be that way till the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Butch. And thank you to Vietnam Veterans Incorporated so much. And thank you to Harry Van Riper for that wonderful rendition of the national anthem. Thank you, Harry. You may be seated. I'd like to call up Samuel Black to represent the Heinz History Center tonight. He's the director of the Museum of African American History at the Senator John Heinz History Center, and has decades of experience as a historian, a curator, a writer, an editor, and author of this wonderful book I highly recommend, Soul Soldiers, African Americans in the Vietnam Era. Sam's brother served in the Vietnam War. Thank you so much, Sam.
Good evening. On behalf of the Heinz History Center, our president and CEO, Dr. Andrew Masick, our chairman of the Board of Trustees, Mr. Hadi Hanna, our staff and volunteers, I'd like to welcome you to this very prestigious occasion to recognize and celebrate the veterans of the Vietnam War. As Todd had mentioned, my oldest brother did 2 tours in Vietnam in the late 60s. My father is a Korean War veteran. My granduncle served in the 365th Infantry during World War I, and I have ancestors who served in the Civil War. So although I'm not a military veteran, I think my family is well represented in the military in American history. So this occasion gives the Heinz History Center an opportunity to continue our collaboration with the Veterans Breakfast Club, which we have really enjoyed. I don't know how long it's been, Todd, but as Todd has pointed out in my book, Soul Soldiers, African Americans in Vietnam War, Vietnam era. Our last Vietnam-related exhibition was in 2019, which was the Vietnam War 1945 to 1975. That also had the opportunity to curate. So enjoy, welcome home, and thank you for joining us at the Heinz History Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I do not need to say to everybody who's watching from home or here in the room that Vietnam veterans are special. They are the only group of veterans who have their own day, Vietnam Veterans Day, March 29th. And it's because not so much of the trauma of the war that Vietnam veterans have this day. Every war is traumatic. Every war is heartbreaking and almost impossible for everybody who participates. It was the trauma of the homecoming that was unique. It was the trauma of the homecoming, I think, that forged the Vietnam veteran generation into something really special. When Vietnam veterans returned home, they returned at best to neglect, at worst to downright abuse. And it's hard enough, I think, to return home from war, but to return home to an unwelcome nation, an unwelcoming nation, I think is unbearable. And I think it was unbearable for many Vietnam veterans. And I think the Vietnam veterans who assembled, the 450 or so Vietnam veterans who will be honored tonight, are the survivors. These are the ones who are able to bear it somehow, some way. When we posted this event on Facebook, we got a comment from a Vietnam veteran, bitter, resentful comment that said, "Too little, too late." He was right. Absolutely right. There's no arguing with that this is too little and too late. The best that we can do, those like me who aren't Vietnam veterans, who aren't veterans, who have come tonight to honor you, is to be grateful that you, Vietnam veterans, have accepted the invitation and have graciously accepted our small tokens of appreciation tonight, even penance, really, that we're here to offer. So I want to thank the several hundred Vietnam veterans who are joining us here for having the grace to open your hearts and joining us for this special event. There's another group who remained in the shadows after the Vietnam War, and that is the Vietnamese people, many of whom fought in the South Vietnamese Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, right alongside of US forces in Vietnam. They were fighting for their country, and when Saigon fell in 1975, they not only lost a war, they lost their country. About 1 million of these eventually made it to the United States as refugees. One of them is here with us this evening. This is Linh Nguyen. She came to the United States as a very young girl after the fall of Saigon in 1975. He's very emotional for Linh. It was a harrowing time for Linh and hundreds of thousands like her who had lost their country, who had lost everything, and made it to a series of refugee camps around the world, many of whom finally making it here to the United States. I asked Linh, I called her, and asked her if she'd be willing to come and say a few words tonight. she was very gracious in saying that she would be willing to do that. And I know it's not easy for her, but I also know it's important because I believe Linh Nguyen will feel like that she's representing not just her and her family, but the hundreds of thousands of others like her. Linh Nguyen, please come up to the podium.
On behalf of my family and all the other refugees and Vietnamese American, I would like to say, Cảm ơn ông bà. Just thank you for all the brave men and women that sacrificed their lives and everything to be here today. I would not have made it here to the United States. I don't even know where to begin, but the only thing I could start is back in 75. My mom was the rock of our family. My dad served for the South Vietnamese military from 71 to 75. Mom kind of knew things weren't going our way, so she got down a leave of absence, told his commanding officers that his father passed away. And this was in April 20th of 75. And they granted him the leave of absence. And he was able to come home, and mom's like, we gotta go. So there's mom, dad. They have two older sisters. No, she was 7 years old. Bon was three years old. I wasn't even a year yet. So mom and dad got us, and my grandfather on my dad's side had a fishing boat, and we all went onto the boat and went out to sea. And that was in April 25th. So we went just to go anywhere, just away from the country. Eventually, mom, or according to mom, it was one of the military, I don't know which boat, because obviously I was too young and nobody else could read English. But it was one of the Navy ship, I'm assuming. She said that they weren't picking up the refugees. It was for just picking up the military. But for whatever reason, they did pick us up. Mom not eating and me being breastfed, I was really sick. So we ended up going to Philippines landed in Philippines for about a week. And they said that I was so sick that they didn't have the medical necessity to take care of an infant, that they wanted to send me to the mainland. And mom's like, no, I can't let you take just my daughter. It's all of us or none of us. So she gambled and she prayed to God and say that you just get us through this. Just, but I understand if you have to take my baby, then she understands. Whatever happened, her prayers were answered. We stayed a week at the Philippines, and then I believe we went to Guam for a month. And we stayed there until the US started bringing in refugees. She said every other country was taking all the refugees because there was a lot of influx, obviously. So she held out for the United States. We ended up in Indian Town Gap, I guess it's in Central PA. So we were there for, I think, several months until all the churches around the Pittsburgh area, and I don't know if it's around the country, I just know our area, was sponsoring our families. So we initially got a sponsor family out in Harrisburg, and it's harder to take the entire family. So they ended up saying, well, we need individual families because family can't obviously support 20 people. So they're like, okay, so mom and dad and 3 children. So we were gonna go to Harrisburg, and she found out that one of my great uncle, Jin, was here stationed in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh, a little confusing. She refused the sponsorship in Harrisburg and found out that Jin was in Pittsburgh. So we ended up here in Pittsburgh, Resurrection Church. And I have to thank that whole community of Brookline for helping us because we had nothing. When we came on the ship, they said, the going joke was they were gonna throw me overboard because they thought I was dead. So my sisters always said, well, you're lucky to be even here because you would have been fish food. But that's, sisters being sisters, I guess. But so they said they only had maximum of 2 pounds per person. And so mom loaded by like just the kids, my older sister, Nguyen Van, with 2 or 3 outfits. And she's like, it's really hot. She's like, just get on the boat and then you can take your clothes off, the extra clothing. So we had nothing, absolutely nothing. So we thank the community for everything. Everything was donations. It was funny when we got to Brookline, we lived on the church's property, went to school at Resurrection. The nuns and the priests were very, very, very generous. And we lived right next to I was gonna say the nunnery, but the convent. But we lived right next to them and they always gave us breads and donuts and they just put it on our porch. And mom being very strict and very precautious and everything, she told us not to touch anything. It's open, don't touch it. We don't know where it came from. And then the nuns told us that like, it's from us, it's safe, you could eat it. So we're like, okay, that's, we're gonna eat it because it's sweets, naturally. So everything that we've learned, just thank you. And I don't know what else to say. It's not even a word big enough. Like right now, my mom, she achieved the American dream. And without everybody here in the room and all the sacrifices, we would not be able to say that. She is now, mommy is 74. She's 74. She's 74, dad's 78. And she accomplished the dream. She raised 8 of us. There ended up being 8 of us, 6 girls, 2 boys, but because we had to keep going until they had their son. And then there was the ghost baby, because there's 14 years age gap, but yeah, and she has now 20 grandchildren, and my 2 kids are here. And unfortunately, my parents don't do public anything, but they thank everybody. They thank God above and everybody who made the sacrifices over there. But yeah, that's us. You're welcome.
I think it's for a meaningful to see coming,
Yeah.
thanks for thinking.
Thank you. No, I wanted him to realize the impact of it was
But it's a ripple effect.
Yes.
It's affects all of us.
Thank you, Lynn. We've been having this little private conversation, how amazing it is that, we have these 2 young people here who are fully part of the American community and the Pittsburgh community. And it's because of the war. Life goes on and life flourishes in a beautiful Nguyen family. And John Weinheimer, you could have this conversation with Lynn maybe privately afterwards. But I would like a Vietnam veteran to speak. And I asked my friend, the Honorable Michael E. McCarthy, who's the judge in the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, if he could come and speak. Hey, John. Judge McCarthy. Judge McCarthy received a bachelor's degree and a law degree from Duquesne University, and he's been awarded many accolades, including, get this, he's in the Duquesne University Sports Hall of Fame. He's a recipient of the Judges Award for the Pennsylvania Bar Foundation, and he was named Veteran of Foreign Wars Man of the Year. And he, of course, is also a veteran. At age 20, Judge McCarthy was a builder 3rd class in the United States Navy Seabees. He deployed to Vietnam. There he is. I don't know if those sideburns are regulation, but he was with the Navy Seabees deployed to Vietnam on Navy Combat Action Team 8 to 1970 in the Mekong Delta. Please join me in welcoming Judge Mike McCarthy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those sideburns are the result of Admiral Zumwalt, who gave us Navy guys the opportunity to grow beards. I was young and dumb. I couldn't even grow a beard, but I could grow sideburns. So, and look at those guns. I mean, my arms. I am fortunate and to be a judge, to be someone that gives back. I want to say a couple things. And the first thing I'd like to say is being here tonight amongst my colleagues and the members that served in Vietnam, I want to make sure that we understand that we must never forget. And we have an obligation to make sure no one ever forgets. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank someone who's not a veteran, but a historian, because the story is being told. Thank you, Todd. By the way, I don't have to suck up to the teacher, so I already got that. I guess the interesting thing about all of this is how we are connected in such a way that not everyone understands or has felt what we have felt. The story you just heard about someone coming here is a huge story about this country. And my short story, because my wife always tells me, Mike, there's no bad short speech. I'll try to keep it short, is when you see that young man in that flak jacket with that M16 on his way out on a detail, I was on a Seabee team. Now, some of you may not know what Seabees are. They're dirt sailors. We don't go on a ship, we go on the ground. Our motto is can do, and failure is not an option. So that taught me at a very young age that this is something that you have to do. Get up, go, do the work. I think what's important about our military service is we all learned that. But there's another interesting part about everybody in this room who has served. I remember as a young man, I raised my right hand and I swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And we all did it. Everybody in this room has done it. Later, after Duquesne, I became a police officer. I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I graduated from law school at night because I had a can-do attitude. Going to night school wasn't as easy while you're working in the day, but somehow I made it through. When I graduated from law school, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. When I became a district attorney and assistant DA, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And in 2007, when I became a judge, I took that oath again. We took that oath as young people to protect and defend the Constitution. And frankly, folks, there's a big difference. The people in this room have made it possible for someone to come here and prosper. And thank God for it, because every day we should never forget the sacrifices that we made, the unconditional sacrifices that we made to protect and defend this country. So again, as my wife said, no bad short speech. I'm going to tell you the short story. The discussion was with Todd, let's talk about Vietnam. I'm not going to tell you a story about that young man in that picture. I'm going to tell you a story about that young man who came home to Pittsburgh. He left Pittsburgh, young and dumb, and he came back with all kinds of new outlooks of the world. So upon leaving Vietnam, our base camp was in Cam Ranh Bay, and then we moved to Bien Hoa, and so I flew out of Ton Sa Nut. We flew to San Francisco, and I was being discharged from the Navy on San Francisco in TI, Treasure Island. The last thing I remember, or one of the things I remember, is we had a meeting where those of us that were being discharged were told by a senior chief that it would be in our best interest if we're flying through Chicago or Atlanta to get out of our uniform, to go to the PX and buy some civilian clothes. So we took the bus, we went over, I bought a pair of bell-bottom jeans and a shirt with a collar that was down here. I had a high and tight haircut and jungle boots. Now, if you couldn't tell I was coming back from Vietnam. So my buddy from Rimlap, Alabama, Jock, he was going to Atlanta and I was going to Pittsburgh through Chicago. And we were warned that we could be approached, and if we were approached, that people would try to engage us in fights or some difficulty that would be arrested. So fortunately, I had a throw down bag and I had my uniform put in it, and I had my my outfit on, and I happened to be on the airplane coming into Pittsburgh. What was interesting is coming out of Chicago, there's a place called Great Lakes Naval Station, and that's where the basics are. And there were two young men in their uniform with just three little stripes. They just got out of basic. Their hair is high and tight. And I kind of laughed looking at them. And there was a couple of Army people there with ribbons. One of them, we engaged in a conversation, who also was coming back from Vietnam. The point of this story is right now, and that is the plane lands. We start to de-embark from the aircraft. Then in Pittsburgh, there was a ramp and you would come down the ramp. And my father, who served in the United States Navy in the Second World War, drove a landing craft in the Pacific. He also took that oath that we're talking about, which is an important connection. My mother and sister were there. So I come bouncing down the ramp in my outfit, and my father looks at me. My mother hugs me. My dad hugs me. My sister hugs me. And my dad says to me, "What's wrong? What do you mean? I'm home. You know, Mancini's. I'm going to get the Mancini's bread and chipped ham." By the way, he bought steaks and didn't tell me. He told my mother, I'm buying Mike steaks. I wanted Mancini's and chipped ham. Anyhow, so my father's looking at me, and I'm trying to explain to my father, who served in the Second World War, why I just came back from combat. I had my combat action badge, but it was in my bag. The reason it was because I couldn't travel in my uniform. And he couldn't understand that. Couldn't understand it. He cried. I never saw him cry before. What did I do? So later, when I got my Mancini's in my chip chopped hand, He wouldn't tell me that that he bought steaks at Miller's. We lived in Bellevue. But he did show up on the third floor of our house on Saturday night and asked me what I was gonna do. Cause he was like, you know, a tough guy. And I said, what do you mean? He said, are you going to church? And I said, yeah, I guess, because I would go with my mother. He said, put your uniform on for your mother. That's the last time I had that uniform. But it isn't the last time I took that oath. And that oath still runs hard and strong. We must never forget. Never forget. Now, the Seabees taught me a lot, and my parents are gone, and they were able to see me do things, and they were proud of me. Tonight is a we night. This is us. Thank you for your service. Thank you for raising that right hand and taking that oath, because what you did made a difference. Not just in my life, not just in your life, but in our lives in this country. Never forget the sacrifices that were made before, after, and during. When the bell rings, we gotta go. And I'd go tomorrow if I could find my uniform. Anyhow, I am so honored to be here, and I can think of people, excuse me, that are not here, like Jimmy Mullen and other people. My friend Jim D'Antonio, whose watch I wear, his wife has it, bought him a Vietnam watch. He passed away. And all of that, my father's has a silver dollar. He died from injuries in the Second World War. And thank all of you for what you've done. And thank my wife for saying there's no bad short speech. Thank you. So you got it.
Before we get to our veterans recognition, I am honored to introduce the next and probably most important part of this evening. And that is Brigadier General John Pippy, who will be presenting a Purple Heart to Vietnam veteran Ted Debiak. Ted, pictured here, served in the 25th Infantry Division as a combat medic. On Christmas Day, 1967, he was lying in his cot, reading a comic book. It was one of the very few days that he wasn't on patrol or search and destroy mission. And an artillery shell came and exploded in his tent, killing some men, wounding others, throwing Ted on the ground. He didn't think anything was wrong until he noticed his left arm was severed from his body. He had gotten 15 teeth knocked out, broken his jaw, suffered devastating hearing loss. And he got home, and after months of recovery and rehabilitation, he noticed on his DD-214 that there was no Purple Heart listed. He would later find out why. It was friendly fire. And the Army was not eager to recognize or remember the incident that had struck his tent on Christmas Day, 1967. It really took him until last year to finally get the Purple Heart put on his DD-214, which he did 56 years later. And we thought it would be fitting and proper to have a proper presentation of the Purple Heart Award this evening with General John Pippy presenting the Purple Heart. I want to thank you, General Pippy. I want to thank General Pippy for doing the honors tonight. And I want to let you know, General Pippy is Deputy Chief of Engineers for National Guard Affairs at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer Headquarters. He is also, at the same time, the Land Component Commander for the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. General Pippy is a West Point graduate. He's an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran, and he has been serving in the military for 32 years. He is also a former board member of the Veterans Breakfast Club. How about, what a coincidence, General. Please welcome General John Pippy.
Thank you, everyone. It is, Todd asked me to speak for just a couple minutes, like the judge said, short speeches are good. This has been a powerful night already for me. And I've heard people behind me talking too. And Lynn, thank you for sharing your story. A lot of times people ask, why do you do what you do? And I say, well, because of my brothers and sisters in arms, because we believe in something better, because we believe in an America that brings freedom and that takes care of family. So thank you so much. It is somewhat personal too. So a lot of because we've known each other for a while, that I'm literally the product of the Vietnam War. I was born in Ubon, Thailand, Ubon Ratchathani Air Base in 1970. My father was enlisted Air Force. He came home with a wife and a kid. And I know. So I usually, at that point, if we don't have any Air Force people, I would say he had a lot of free time. But, on a more serious note, though, it is, I do remember coming back. My mother spoke very little English. And so she worked as an interpreter for one of the services, I think it was Catholic services that help Laotian and Thai families, Vietnamese families reintegrate, in this case, and where we grew up, right outside of Boston. But when you're a child of that war, literally, I didn't know it when I was a young kid. My grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, enlisted Navy in the Pacific. I only knew that because of tattoos on his arms. But they didn't talk a lot about it. But what they did was they literally lived. They lived a good life because they weren't recognized, as Todd said. They weren't given the welcome that they so deserved. And there were over 9 million men and women who served during that era that weren't welcomed home the right way. And I have a very short story. I deployed in 2003 in Iraqi freedom. We're rolling into Iraq. We come back 9 months later. I'm a company commander. And it was a reserve engineer company out of Katanning. We're coming back. We're being escorted in by fire trucks and police and all the riders. There's flags everywhere. There are people cheering, and it felt pretty good. And but I don't remember. I remember the feeling, but what I'll never forget is a look in this Vietnam veteran's face. He came up to me and he had tears in his eyes. His daughter was on my truck drivers, was in one of the convoys that took some fire, and everyone was safe. But the tears in his eyes, understanding, he's like, she finally got what I never got. And that's worth clapping for, folks. We finally got it right. A little too little, too late, but it still took another 14 years. That was in 2003. It was in 2017 where we finally gave you the date you deserve because you have done so much. You've inspired families. You've inspired, guys like me who grew up in the projects to stay in the military for 32 years. I just want you to know for the Vietnam veterans, you don't get the credit you deserve. You were, they talk about the greatest generation, for World War II. You were the quietest generation. It was your acts, not your words, that made a difference. And now our country, because I know in 2001, 9/11, it was the Vietnam vets that said, we will not let another generation of men and women be treated like we were treated. So thank you for all you've done. I want to give you a round of applause. Well, on that note, you know, we don't always get the award, the medals right. And it is, Todd, it is my privilege and honor today that Ted, if you could come up here. Let's get that. You have the medal. So, it's a good Army thing. He actually brought it so I can make sure. For those who, I said, hope they brought the medals. Yeah, I'm a general. It wasn't on my list to bring the medal. I do what I'm ordered. And right at that moment, I'm thinking, I hope Todd brought it. So Todd mentioned Ted was with HHC second and you know, wounded in combat or wounded overseas, and told the story. We finally are doing a better job of recognizing all the men and women whose service and sacrifice have made our nation a better place. I will also tell you, when I looked at his background, I was always impressed by the combat medics. You know, we need them and we appreciate them. But as was mentioned earlier by the judge and my friend Judge McCarthy, that Ted, you know, when he came back, he made a difference in our region, and he has helped inspire people, from getting his PhD to working as in nuclear chemistry from University of Pittsburgh, to working as a senior research scientist at Grumman. And then the one that really impressed me and making a difference as a science tutor and an adjunct instructor at the Community College of Allegheny County. Let's give him a round of applause. Ted, it is my honor to present you a award and the Purple Heart for your service and actions during the Vietnam War. I want to thank you on behalf of our nation for a job well done. Hey now, you know, congratulations.
No,
Okay.
I told him he did not have to
Okay.
say anything.
Well then,
But the floor is yours, Ted.
well, I will just say this, then, Todd. Thank you for doing this, and thank you, Veterans Breakfast Club. Keep on telling the story, brother.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I'm just so honored to be a part of this. And this is what the Veterans Breakfast Club does. We have programs kind of like this where veterans come together with the public to share their stories of service. Everybody is invited. We kick off our in-person schedule tonight on March 29th. We'll have a breakfast in Beaver next week. We'll have then in Bethel Park and Penn Hills. We kind of ride circuit around the region. Please do join us anytime you can. You could go to our schedule at veteransbreakfastclub.org. We do online programming Monday nights and Thursday nights. And the idea is to connect and heal and to educate and inspire. I'm educated every day. I'm inspired every day by working with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And I think if you just joined us once or twice, you would be inspired also. We now go on, we're here at the recognition part of our event. We're going to recognize every Vietnam veteran who registered for this event online and in person. If you are here in the room and you hear your name called, we will ask that you come up to the front and you will be pinned you'll be given a 50th anniversary Vietnam War commemorative pin, where I'm going to ask Larry Woods if he would up, Vietnam veteran. He served in the security police at Tui Wa Air Base in Vietnam, and I had the great pleasure of traveling to Vietnam with Larry. Oh, that was an unforgettable experience. We also have Deanna Margolis, who is currently in, Deanna, you're here somewhere. She's currently in the Air Force. She's also security police. They now call it security forces. And you're going to be assisting Larry. With Deanna is Deli Bowman. Deli, thank you so much. You're one of those people like me who didn't serve, although you do have uncles. One's a Marine and one's in the Army. Thank you, Deli, for volunteering. Do we have Kanan? Kanan Stewart? Kanan, very good. Come on up. He's going to be also assisting. Marlene, you are welcome. Marlene Orozco, you're welcome to come up also. And this is kind of a receiving line. The idea is we wanted to have non-veterans and veterans up here at front, welcoming everybody home, thanking the veterans for their service. Amanda Olson and Amy Fredericks represent Vitas Hospice. They very kindly and generously supported this event with their sponsorship, and they made it possible. So thank you, all of you, for if you did serve in those dates, we have a welcome home gift bag out front in the lobby. You can pick it up when you leave this evening. Those of you who are watching online will get it in the mail. Thomas Adams, would like to recognize him. Army, 1968, 1971. Bill Agnew, Navy, 1972 to 1975. Mike Allen, Navy. I know he's here. They always put the big guys in submarines. Mike Allen. There you are, Mike. Navy, 1968, 1972. Michael Menta, Air Force, 1966, 1969. Ray Emilio, Doc Emilio. He was a corpsman with the Navy, with the Marines at Quai Son in Vietnam in 1968. A thrill of my life was visiting Quai Son with Doc Emilio. Howard Anchors is a retired Master Navy Chief. He was in Nha Trang in 1971 to 1972. Bob Ankitis was a 104th Airborne Division, Army in Vietnam, retired as a lieutenant colonel. He served at a number of fire support bases. I got to travel with him to Vietnam just this past year to retrace some of his steps. Jerry Anderson from Clifton, Virginia, Army, 1956 to 1984. Brian Ashbaugh, West Point class of 1966, and a Vietnam veteran. Al Atlansky is joining us from California tonight. He served in the Air Force, 1958 to 1962. My friend Jerry Augustine, who's in Middletown, Connecticut, he's watching online. Jerry served in the Army 1965 to 1967. He wrote a wonderful book about his service, and he also traveled with us to Vietnam last year. Larry Alt, Navy, 1969 to 1973. Is Larry here? Oh, then I could talk about him. Larry has some of the funniest stories I've ever heard. He came this close to being thrown in the brig and really should have been. And maybe if you come to an event and he could share his story. Jack Alea, Army, 1972 to 1979. George Bannon, Air Force, 8 years. Army, 6 years. 1964, 1972, and then 72 to 78. John Barber, who lives in Aliquippa, he's a very proud Marine. Is there any other kind? 1965 to 1971. John Barbish, Army, 1967, 1969. Michael Barnhart from Ohio, Navy, 1972 to 1978. Wayne Bassett, Army, 1970 to 72. Alan Bashar, Army, 1968 to 1979. Larry Bates. I don't believe Larry Bates could make it tonight. He's Marine Corps, 1969, 1970. We have Chuck Bauman, Marine Corps, 65 to 67. Tom Begandy, Air Force. Barry Betzinger, Army. Manny Behar is watching from Elkhart, Indiana. He was Army, 67 to 69. Edward Balunis, Army, 1965, 1967. Elaine Berkovitz. Is Elaine Berkovitz here? Okay. Dave Berman, Army, real scholar of Vietnam. Bob Byam, Army, 1966 to 1968. Wallace Bernacki. Wallace Bernacki is Army, 1968 to 1969. I think this is Bob. We have Bill Bigelow, Navy. I know he's here. He was Mobile Riverine Force. There he is. He's a big target in the Mekong Delta. John Black, United States Air Force, is watching us online. Ed Blank, Army, 1965, 1967, with the Signal Corps. Company commander. Congratulations, Ed. You know, when the Veterans Practice Club started in 2008, it was almost exclusively World War II veterans sharing their stories. One of the first, if not the first, Vietnam veteran to share his story at our event was Clem Blazewick, Army. Served in Long Bin Medical Evac Hospital. Jay Blum, Navy, 1972 to 1976. Marshall Bond, United States Army, May 1969 to July 1972 is watching online. Bob Bonfanti, Army, 1969 to 1971. Bob Bonfanti. Joe Boscia, I know you're here. Hey, Joe. Joe was a advisor to the South Vietnamese Army in Vietnam, 1965, 1970. Bill Boswell. I don't think Bill Boswell is with us here tonight. He was in the United States Air Force, long career in the Air Force, 1964 to 1998. He will receive his pin with his welcome home bag in the mail, as will James Bauer, the veteran's friend who lives in Kansas. I hear from him often. He joins us online on our programs Monday night and Thursday night. Good to see you, James. Army, 1970, 1973. Kenneth Boyd, a wonderful veteran who I'm envious of. He lives in Hawaii. He joins us online on Monday nights and Thursday nights. Ken Boyd, Army, 1966, 1968. Gary Brashear, I know he lives in the eastern part of the state. Army, 1964 to 1965. Ray Brendel should be here, 1973 to 1976. Had the pleasure of traveling with Ray in Vietnam just in November and December. Great. Larry Russell Smith Jr., United States Marine Corps, 1965 to 1969. Ronald Brinsick, Navy, 66 to 70. Jim Brockman, I know he is here. Jim Brockman, Navy, 1966 to 1970. Brockman. Andy Bernanke. Hey, Andy, Army, 1958 to 1964. You don't look that old. Terrific. Barry Brown is in Cheney, Washington. He was in the Army 1967 to 72. Andy. Andy is one of those wonderful volunteers who distributes Veterans Breakfast Club magazines all throughout the region with his wife, Bernice. I'm so grateful to them. Many people learn about us really because of their efforts. Jim Brown, Marine Corps. Vietnam era. Jim, you are here. Another proud Marine. Jim Bruder, Navy, 1964 to 66. There he is, Jim Bruder, who is a tireless advocate for veterans in our region. We have Leland Bundy, who's watching online, Air Force. We have Michael Burke, Phoenix, Arizona, Army. We have Betty Burris, one of those Army Red Cross volunteers that we absolutely want to recognize. She worked in military hospitals throughout the world and in Vietnam in 1972 to 1973. I didn't know you were here, Leland. Joe Byers, who lives in Ligonier, PA, he flew Spectre AC-130 gunships in Vietnam. He could not be here tonight but we will be sending him a welcome home bag. Butch Burke is here. Butch. Butchie, 66, 67, 19 months in Vietnam. Robert Kane, United States Marine Corps. Robert served in the Marine Corps 68 to 70. Robert, were you drafted into the Marine Corps?
No, I enlisted.
You enlisted. Well, what can you say? Nars Khalifa, he lives in Virginia. Let me tell you about Nars. Nars has a really harrowing, fascinating Korean War story. He's a Korean War veteran, but after the Korean War, he joined the American Red Cross and served in Vietnam as a volunteer. 1967 to 1968. Nars, we salute you and you'll get a bag in the mail. Jim Pardillo, Mercer, PA, Marine Corps, 67 to 68. Ed Carlisle, is Ed here? With BBI, there he is. Army, 66 to 69. Ed Carlisle. Ron Caruso, another one of these people who volunteered for the Marine Corps. Ron, come on up. He served in the Marines. Ooh, in the good old days, 1956 to 1959. William Cavalucha served in the Army 66 to 68. Nicholas Sircone, Nicholas Sircone is, yeah, here you go, Sircone. United States Navy. "26 years in the Navy, 1973 to 1999. Philip Cherusi, Marine Corps. Frank Cetera, Army. Marty Chavez, who joins us online from Colorado. He was a Marine, 1964 to 1968. Jim Cheskowich, I just heard from, Army, 101st Airborne Division, Fubai, 1970 to 1972, wrote a book about it. And we'll be talking with him about his book on our program sometime soon. Joe Chivers, what a supporter you are of veterans throughout the region. He was Navy, 1973 to 1977 active, and then 10 years reserve. We would love to let people know about the Gold Star family table that we have here tonight. Chris Chojnicki is one of the Gold Star spouses. Her husband served in Vietnam, 1969 to 1972. The American Red Cross had over 1,000 women, young women, who served during the Vietnam War as volunteers to entertain and boost the morale of troops. They traveled throughout the country. We have several of them with us tonight. One of them online is a wonderful woman, Jean Sam Christie. Sam is watching from Plymouth, Massachusetts tonight. She was with the American Red Cross in Vietnam, has a wonderful story to tell. Thank you, Sam, for your service. You'll be getting a welcome home bag in the mail. Dave Charzin, United States Air Force, 1971 to 1975. And it's funny, you know, Dave is one of these men I know. I didn't know he was a veteran because his father was a World War II Navy veteran that we spent a lot of time with and hearing his story. Dave was always with his father, never shared his own story. Dave Charzin. John Siak, Army. 39 years in the Army? Herbert Clements, Navy, 1962 to 1966. Ray Colamarino, Navy, 1960 to 1966. Dave Clements. Dale Collins, Army, 1967. Bill Confer, I know he's watching from Lidditz, PA, 1966 to 73. Coleman Conley, Navy, 62 to 66. Richard Conley, Army, 1966 to 1968. Richard, come on up. Chris Connor was an Army WAC. Her close friends call her Marjorie. Stephen Corbett, Clearwater, Florida, was Air Force 68 to 72. Michael Corcoran, New Jersey, United States Marine Corps. Sam Cordis, Army, 1970 to 72. Sam Cordis, there you go. I do know that Vietnam veteran Pat Core is with us tonight. Pat Core, yeah, come on up. Army. Pat Core. Joseph Cortese is Army online. Douglas Cox online, Navy, Lieutenant Commander. He was an F-8 Crusader fighter pilot. Alex Krigo, Army. There. 1972 to 1975. Kenneth Crosby served in the Navy, 70 to 76. Terry Cullinan from Follansbee, West Virginia, served in the Army in Vietnam in 1970-71. Rich Kurnow, United States Navy, 1961 to 1967. Tom Cusack, very proud Marine. Served in the Marine Corps 1966, 1967. Is Justin D'Antonio with us? Justin D'Antonio. He served in the Army 1961, 1962. Thomas Dower served in the Navy 65 to 69. Ted Debiak, Army 66 to 68. Bill Dydig, Air Force 1972 to 1996. 24 years. William Dydig. Penny Lee Deere. There you are.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Penny Lee Deer is in Albany, New York. I just corresponded with her recently. She was an Army WAC from 1975 through Desert Storm and then retired. We have the meanest Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force with us. His name is John DeLallo, 1968 to 1989. Come on up, John. Ronald D. Marino from Greensburg, PA, was in the Air Force. He'll be getting his welcome home bag in the mail, as will Thomas DeMont, Navy, 1962 to 1972. We have John M. Denk, Navy, with us, 1969 to 1973. And John and I were talking because there's another John Denk with us tonight, I think, John P. Denk, Army, 1969 to 1971. Jerry Daring, Air Force. Is Jerry with us here tonight? Jerry Daring. There you are, Jerry. He served in the Air Force 1973 to 1977. Jerry Daring. All right, we have Paul Dillon, Durham, North Carolina, Army Reserve. We have Rich Dorr, who's in New Jersey tonight. I had the great pleasure to travel to Vietnam with him also. He was served in Phu Bai in the Army side. Mike Dorish, United States Marine Corps. Mike Dorish. Robert Douglas is in Kentucky. He was a Marine. Robert Dowd, Air Force. He was in the Air Force from 1968 to 1994. We have George Frank Jr., Army. We have Gerald Freed, Army. We have Ford Fuller. I hope there you are, Ford, Army, 1968 to 1979. Ford was in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. Jerry Gagens, United States Air Force, long career in the Air Force. Jerry Gagens, not sure if he's with us here tonight. Richard Galarno, Navy. Joe Galuz, Army. William Ganjos, Army. Rose Gantner, American Red Cross volunteer donut dolly. She is a superstar, and you can actually see her in the exhibit downstairs, the Women's History exhibit. Her stuff from Vietnam is on display. William Garrison, United States Marine Corps, will be watching us online. Mike Garrison, proud Navy Seabee, member of VBI. Mark Gasperin served in the Navy. He's watching us online. Richard Genser, Army, 1970 to 75. There you are, Richard. Bob George, Navy. Bob, VBI member, 64 to 68. Timothy Gingery, Army, there you are, 1968, 1971. Chuck Giovannitti, Chuck, I know you are here. There you are. He served in the Navy 1965 to 1969. David Gladman, Air Force, 1968 to 1972. David Gladman, are you with us? There you are. Robert Glass is joining us online. He was in the Army. Jerry Gogolin was in the Army in the 25th Infantry Division, 1964 to 1967. Jerry, are you here this evening? There you are. We have two Golombuskis. Dennis Golombuski, Army, Richard Golombuski, Army. They both served in Vietnam and they're both watching online. We have Lawrence Golovsky, Army, 1970 to 1971. Just was able to meet Larry for the first time tonight. If you see Larry after the program, ask him about elephants in Vietnam. He knows all about it. Larry Gombos, I was so honored to meet you in person for the first time tonight. Larry Gombos, who now lives in North Carolina. Larry lives in North Carolina. I've got to tell you this. Larry lives in North Carolina. I called him up on Clem Blazewick's suggestion. Oh, South Carolina. Is there a difference? South Carolina. South Carolina. And I called him up because we were doing a show on graves registration. Those who served in graves registration. Larry did that in Vietnam. Truly one of the hardest jobs you could ever have, graves registration. And his telling his story online, I believe it was the first time he's told his story. It was an education, not just for me and the others who watched, but the other Vietnam veterans who were on with us. Robert Goodall, Navy, 1961 to 1965. We have Betty Goodman Klein joining us online. She served 25 years in the Army Reserves. We have Larry Googans with us. Hey, Larry. Larry was United States Air Force pilot. Stationed in Thailand during the Vietnam War. Richard Gotch could not make it tonight, Army. Frank Cattuso, Army, also could not make it. Louis Gregovitz, Army, 2 years, 67, 69. Ray Gross, 1967, 1969. Richard Gruber, Army. Carl Guroni, Army. Tony Haggerty. Is Tony with us? United States Navy. Tony Haggerty. James Howler, Navy. There you are, James Howler, United States Navy, 1966, 1969. Ralph Hancharik, I know you're here. Where did Ralph Hancharik go? He was sitting right there. Probably the men's room, you're right, yeah. He served 30 years in the Army. Joe Hanlon, Army. There you are, Joe. You recognize that hat? Ed Hankey, Army Corps of Engineers, couldn't make it tonight. Thomas Hands, United States Air Force. John Harlan, Army, 1972 to 2012. John Harlan. Paul Harris, Coast Guard veteran. Is he with us here tonight? There. One of the two, I think, Coast Guard vets we have tonight. Paul Harris, Coast Guard. Herb Hartle. Herb is with us tonight. Here, there he is. 1962 to 1965. James Hegedus, Army, 66 to 69. James Hegedus. Gregory Heinley, Army, 1970-71. Bill Henready, Army. August 67 to August 1969, Bill Henready. Bill Henry is watching from Fort Worth, Texas. He was in the Army. Eugene Herman is watching from Amherst, Massachusetts, Army. William Hess, also watching. He was a Marine Corps. Michael Josephson was in the 1st Air Cav in Vietnam, 1969 to 1970. Robert Joyce was in the Army for 3 years, 67 to 70. Tom Jolkowski was Air Force, 68 to 72. Joe Jurison was in the Navy for 6 years. Joe Jurison is with us. There he is. Robert Kalinowski was in the Air Force, in the Air Force Reserves for almost 30 years. But I think it's the next one, the next veteran, Ann Cultrider, I think has everyone beat. Ann Cultrider, Army WAC. She served in the Army for 41 years. And I think she outranked her husband, Jim Cultrider, who's also with us. Army, Vietnam, 1969, 1972. I traveled in Vietnam with Jim Cultrider. And Ronald Kappeler served in the Army. He's watching online, as is Gus Kappeler and Colette Karshner, Navy. Bill Kassouf, United States Marine Corps, 1968 to 1969. Donald Keel, Air Force, 1969 to 1980. Andy Kearney. Andy, 25th Infantry Division. 1968 at Cu Chi. He was at Cu Chi. Ralph Kankarek has returned from the bathroom. We are recognizing him now, Ralph. Oh, man. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't help myself. I can't help myself. Dwayne Kelly, United States Air Force. Dwayne Kelly, you have Dwayne. Dwayne's here. Dwayne Kelly's with us. Served for 24 years. I'm pretty sure I saw Frank Kelly also, proud Marine. Frank Kelly, who's the commandant of a local Marine Corps League post here. Detachment. Frank Kelly, United States Marines. Patrick Kelly is in Somerset. He was served in the Army in Vietnam, 1969 to 1970. Kenneth Kennel, Navy, 1971 and 1975. Thomas Kennel was in the Army, 68 to 71. Joe Ketterer, Army, 69 to 97. John Kimikata, Army, 1974 to 1977. Michael Kirsch, United States Marine Corps, 2 years, 69 to 71. James Klein, Army, 1970 to 1972. Paul Klein, Marine Corps, Paul Klein served as in the United States Marine Corps and then in the Army Reserve National Guard. He retired in the Army Reserve National Guard. He spent many more years in the National Guard than he did in the Marine Corps. But if you ask him what branch of service he served in, he'll tell you he's a Marine. Paula Klinkler, Marine. Paula, hey. Paul Podman, Jr., Army. Paul. John Pelarowski, United States Air Force, 1965 to 1968. Joe Cartarba, Army, 67 to 69. George Kniss, Air Force, 1961, 1975. He took a picture of elephants in the Mekong Delta. He developed the picture. He didn't take it. He developed the picture. That's right. Skip the page. All right, James Hill, Marine Corps. Jim, there you are. Jim served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, and he served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Ronald Hauser, Air Force and Air National Guard. Patrick Hodge, Air Force and Army from 65 to 88. Patrick Hodge. Stan Hoffman. He served in the Mekong Delta with the United States Navy in Vietnam. Wonderful story to share. Alvin Huff, Birmingham, Alabama, served in the Army from 71 to 2013. Steve Hudspeth, Army, 1969 to 1972. Steve Hudspeth. He's in the bathroom. Somebody go get Steve. Patrick Hughes, my friend Patrick Hughes from Texas. He served in the Army, 173rd Airborne Brigade, 1967 to 1969. I know he's watching. Hi, Patrick. Dennis Hughes, Army, 66 to 68. Gordon Israelson, Army. John Izzy, Marine Corps. Clarence Jackson, Montclair, New Jersey, United States Air Force. Willie Jackson Jr., Navy. Jim Jameson, Air Force. John Janicki. Is John Janicki with us? There we go. We got a bunch of Janickis. We have John Janicki, Air Force. Andy Janicki, Air Force. Richard Janicki, Air Force. And then get this, Jim Janicki, Army, isn't here tonight. He sent me an email saying I can't make it. Bill Jeffcoat, is Bill with us? Bill Jeffcoat. There you are, Bill, proud Marine, dog handler in Vietnam with a wonderful story to share. Dan Generetsky served in coastal operations in the Navy, 1968. Linda Jolly was an Army WAC. Jimmy Jones served many years in the Coast Guard. Jimmy, you are here. Jimmy Jones, he's here. He's in the bathroom. Jimmy Jones was Coast Guard. We don't have many Coast Guard, but great guy with a lot of great stories. Jerry Jones, I know Jerry's here, proud Marine. 1969. Thank you for coming, Jerry. Thank you very much for coming today. Jimmy Jones's brother, older brother, Larry Jones is I think he can't make it tonight. Larry Jones, you're not here, Army? Joseph Knopick, Army. Joseph Knopick, Army. Deb Crawl, Deb, I think I saw you. Deb Crawl, there's Deb Crawl. Air National Guard. 33 years. Ron Kramer, United States Air Force. 1972 to 1994. Gerald Krauchak. Gerald Krauchak. There he is, Gerald Krauchak, Army. 1961 to 1962. All right, you know, poor Jessie Ferrari. She must think I have something against her. I skipped her. Again, this is the second year I've skipped her. I skipped the whole page. What? What? I can't read that, Rick. Yeah, E's and F, I know, I skipped it. Oh, man, I tell you.
You're younger than I.
I skipped the page. Yeah, I need to go to the restroom, right? All right. Okay, let's do this. Let's go to the page I skipped. Craig Doyle, Navy, 65 to 71. Craig Doyle. George Eastman, Brighton, Colorado, United States Air Force. Rich Ebert, United States Marine Corps, 1968. I got it. Jim Edgman from Texas is a Marine. He will get his welcome home package in the mail. Nick Ettinger. Had the great pleasure of traveling to Vietnam with Nick in November and December. Nick Ettinger served with the 1st Logistical Command in Da Nang. Nick, right here, he was the Sam Walton of Da Nang, Vietnam. Bill Edwards. Bill Edwards, PA National Guard. George Ehringer, Army. Vincent Engel, Army. Rick Erisman, Navy, 1969 to 1975. Rick Erisman. There you go, Rick. Love traveling with Rick to Vietnam. Robert Farr, Connecticut, Navy. You'll get it in the mail. Ernesto Fideli will also get it in the mail. He's in Cincinnati, Marine Corps. Ron Fedston, Marine Corps. Ron Fedston. Robert Ferguson will get his in the mail. He's in Texas. Justice Sita Ferrari. Air Force, 1968 to 1971. Hang my head in shame, Jesse. Thomas Fife, I know, could not make it. He was Army. He wrote a fine memoir of his Vietnam service. Jack Fishman in Atlanta, not here, but he will get it in the mail. Bob Flage, he is in Jacksonville, Florida. Bob will be getting his in the mail. Bob is one of our regulars on Monday night. Tom Flory, Army, 1971, 1974. Bruno Fontanesi, I didn't see Bruno. Is Bruno here? Bruno Fontanesi, he was another one of those in the Mobile Riverine Force. I just like saying Bruno Fontanesi. I haven't seen Bruno in a long time. Yeah, you think he's Italian? Steve Foreman is in Long Beach, California. He served in the Army in 1965, 1967. I traveled to Vietnam with Steve Foreman in 2018. Steve is originally from Pittsburgh, and we're hoping that he moves back to Pittsburgh. Carl Francis Navy. Carl, you're here. Carl Francis Navy, 1969, 1970.
You gotta wonder.
Yes.
Hey,
Jim Frank, Navy. Leslie Frank, Navy. William Krause. William Krause, Army. Jim Cusick, Navy Reserve. Yes, there's Jim Cusick, Navy. John Kula, Navy, 1967 to 71. John Kula. Bruce Kurth is in Michigan. He was in the Navy. Jim Kurtz is in Middleton, Wisconsin. He was in the Army, 65 to 69. George Kutcher Jr. George, you were Army, 73 to 76. Are you with us tonight, George? Paul Lacko, he's here. Paul, United States Marine, 1967, 1968. Don Ladsko, Air Force, 67 to 71. John Ladsko. Ron Lassinger, United States Marine Corps, 65 to 68. John Leach, he's in Florida, Army, 67 to 84. Carmen Lebder, Army, 1966, 1967. Carmen Lebder. Daniel Lesmiller is in Wisconsin. Glenn LaJuicy, he is Air Force, 69 to 73. Barry Lipson, he was in the Navy, 1962 to 71. John Littlehale, he was Navy Seabees, 1966, 68. George Loki, George Loki, there you are, George Loki. George has a wonderful World War II vintage Jeep. Al Longden, he's a friend of mine and a literary agent. He was an Army Special Forces in Vietnam. He's in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Al, you'll be getting yours in the mail. Gary Ludwig in Nevada, Army. Stanley Majaka, Army, 62 to 65. Gary Mann, Army, 1969, 1971. Gary Mann. Glenn Mars was in the Army 1963 to 1969. He was in Vietnam in 1968. Glenn Mars. Richard Marshall was in the Army. Dave Maslon was in the Air Force. Bob Matthews, I saw Bob tonight. Bob Matthews was in the United States Army. Not only a Vietnam veteran, but a real expert on the Vietnam War. Bob Matthews. Thank you, Bob, for coming tonight. Ed Majerez was in the Army and Medical Service Corps, 68 to 69. He will be getting his welcome home bag in the mail. We have the Honorable Judge Michael McCarthy, United States Seabee, 69 to 72. Jeff McClellan, Army, 69 to 72. Jeff McClellan. Jeff served in the Army 1969 to 1972. David McComb, Navy, 1965 to 1973. David McComb. Bob McCormick couldn't make it tonight. He was Army 67 to 1970 in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. John McMahon, United States Air Force, 1969 to 1995. Full career, retired. Dan McPoyle served on a ship called the USS Niagara Falls, 1969. He was just a kid, 1970. Melvern McRoberts served in the Navy, 1968 to 1970. Melvern McRoberts. Ed Meadows served in the Army in Vietnam. Ed Meadows. Keith Medved served in the Army, 71, 72. George Metz served in the Army with Special Forces, 68 to 69. Robert Musner Sr. served in the Army, Vietnam, 69 to 70. Terrence Michael, Army, 65 to 68. Frank Millet, United States Marine Corps, 64 to 68. Paul Mihalik served in the Air Force, Studies and Observations Group, 1965 to 1969. Stanley McColajek served in the Army. Anton Miller served in the Air Force. Edward Mystic served in the Army. James Minica, Jim Minica, I'll see him next week, I hope, served in the Navy. Bob Mizwa. Bob, are you here tonight? Bob Mizwa. There you are. Here's another one of these guys. Bob served in an armored division in Vietnam. And then he rejoined after 9/11 and served in Iraqi freedom also. Brenton Mock served in the Army. James Monco served in the Coast Guard. Diana Monco served in the Navy. Chris Moore, is Chris Moore with us tonight? I thought he was going to charm us with his presence. Army, is he here? Oh, there you are. He is charming us with his presence. Chris was our keynote speaker last year's event. Alan Morris, Mandan, North Dakota. He served in the Air Force. You know, and Carmela Mullen, she's such a part of the veterans community. She lost her husband, Jimmy Mullen, several years ago. I just want to recognize Carmela Mullen, Vincent Nardozzi, Army, 65 to 67. Rich Narashuf, Air Force. Marty Neiman, Marty, come on up. Marty Neiman was Army Corps of Engineers, 1971 to 73. My good friend, Old Salt, Don Nemchek is watching from home. United States Navy, 1970 to 1974. He was a radio man aboard the USS Constellation. Andy Niggett, also watching at home, was Marine Corps, grievously wounded on October 9th, 1968. Got to travel to Vietnam with him. William Nizinski, Navy, 1966 to 1970. William Nizinski. Vincent Nolan, Air Force. Joe Noonan from Florham Park, New Jersey, Navy. Bill Northey, Air Force. Frank Novak, Air Force. Robert Nowazik, Army. David O'Brien, Air Force. Tom Achala from Huntington, West Virginia, Marine Corps. Tom served Operation Frequent Wind, which was the evacuation of Saigon in 1975. He also participated in the evacuation of Phnom Penh, Cambodia, an operation called Operation Eagle Pool. And I want to talk to Tom about that experience. Mary Patricia O'Connell, Army, for 25 years total. She was in Vietnam in 1970, 1971. Bob Olinger, Marine Corps. Bob, you are here, 1968 to 1972. Richard O'Malley served in the Army, 1968 to 1970. Richard O'Malley. Tom O'Neill served in the Army, 68 to 71. Tom O'Neill, there we go. Tom. Joe Orsolak served in the Army. Dennis Oxford served in the Army. Rick Poller, I know you served in the Army, 1965 to 1967. Harold Pizon from Billerica, Georgia. He served in the Army. Tony Pilato. Hey, Tony Pilato, if you want to see Tony Pilato's flak jacket that he wore in Vietnam, go to the wonderful display at the Soldiers and Sailors table. Wonderful display that they have there. Michael Papuga, Marine Corps, Charles Palmer, Marine Corps, Gene Pash, Air Force. Gene Pash, come on up. Gene served in the Air Force 1968 to 1972. Mark Pavlik served in the Air Force 1969 to 1976. Mark Pavlik, are you with us? There you are. Mark. Lori Pearl from Ligonier, PA was a Red Cross donut dolly in Vietnam in 1970. Lori Pearl, come on up. We want to honor you, Lori. Please come on up. There you are, Lori Pearl. Lori came on our trip to Vietnam in 2020. John Pert is watching from LaBelle, Florida. He was in the Army. He joins us online. And John asked me that I honor his friend, Sam Rowan, in Springfield, Illinois. And we will be sending Sam Rowan also a welcome home bag. Dave Pager, United States Air Force. 65 to 75, Dave. We're going to honor Don Peterson also from Plymouth, Minnesota. He served in the Air Force 71 to 76. Chuck Perturkey, one of our great Marines, couldn't be here tonight. He served in Vietnam. Is he here? What the heck, Chuck? Let me know you're coming, huh? Chuck Perturkey, what a story he has. Thank you, Chuck, for making it. He said, I ain't dead yet. Richard Pescator from Beverly, Massachusetts. I know he's watching online. He was in the Army in the 1960s, and he's truly the country's leading expert on the origin of the Navy. And he's going to come on our program and talk about how the Navy was born, the United States Navy was born. Dean Peters, Air Force, 67 to 91. Dean Peters. Michael Pueller, Air Force, couldn't be with us tonight. He will get his welcome home bag in the mail. Chris Phillips, United States Air Force, he will also get the bag in the mail. Lee Phillips, Navy. Lee served in the Navy 1965 to 1969. Joseph Pilitary, Army. Andrew Popko, Marine Corps. Bill Tony Pursuti. Oh, there you are. All right. Andrew Popko. Bill Pursuti served in the Air Force 66 to 69. Bob Brigance, is Bob here? Served in the Marine Corps 61 to 64. Bob Brigance, there he is. Right, Jim Puhala, helicopter pilot in the Army in Vietnam. Jim Puhala. There he is. William Rath served in the Navy. Carl Rechtenwald, he's here tonight. He also served in the Navy. Carl Rechtenwald. He was a tin can sailor. There he is, Carl Rechtenwald. Gretchen Reed served in the Air Force. Tom Riley from Rhode Island served in the Army. Dennis Ryder from Silverdale, Washington, Navy. Marty Rezick, Army. Ron Restifo, Navy. There we go. Ron served in the Navy from 1967 to 1993. It's a long time.
And just to touch the news, I was in Para.
And he was in Tora, the movie. He was, one of his ships is in the movie. Thomas Rhodey, Army. Gregory Rice, Army. 7th Cav. Gregory Rice. Francis Ricker, Navy. Danny Riley, Coast Guard. Chad Riddle is here with us tonight. He was Navy, 1971 to 1974. Jim Roberts is the author of Matt 111, a wonderful memoir of his service in the Army in Vietnam, 1969 to 1971. Jim Roberts. John Robinson, Army, 66 to 68. John Robinson. No, I got her. Yep. Kenneth Robinson, Army. Joe Rogowski, Air Force. Lino Bixby, Army. Bill Rooney, is Bill with us tonight? He's a Marine, proud Marine, Bill Maroney, 62 to 64. There you are, Bill Rooney. Bill Rooney. There's a wonderful nun in Lakewood, Colorado, who joins us online, Sister Mary Nell Gage. She served in Vietnam in an orphanage during the Vietnam War. And she asked that we honor Ruth Roughton, who was a MACV stewardess, 1969 to 1972. We're going to make sure that Ruth gets her welcome home bag in the mail. We got Andy Rowe, who I first met just tonight, United States Air Force, 1966 to 1970. If you ask Andy why he joined the Air Force, he will tell you because he was smart. Ken Rizicki. David Rue, Army, 1968 to 1969. David Rue. Joseph Rupnik, Army. Rex Rutkowski, Army. Served the year 1970 in Vietnam. Rex Rutkowski. Adib Sabri in Washington, D.C. has joined us online. Adib served in Vietnam in the Army. Zach Saker. Zach Saker, Air Force. Stephen Salkoff, Air Force. Luis Sanchez, Army. Joe Santilli, I'm calling you up. You were the United States Navy, 1971 to 1975. John Santoriello, Army, 1969, 1970. John Schupp, Army. Gary Scheib, Marine Corps. David Schmidt, Navy. Ron Schmidt, Army. 1972 to 1985, including his reserve time. Ron Schmidt. Bruce Schneider in Minnesota, served in the Army. Daniel Schwab, Navy. Daniel Schwab, Navy. Francis Sciolo, Army. Francis Sciolo, Army.
First airborne, 1669, and then Goodman.
Okay, I mentioned it. We have Rebecca Schaefer in the Navy, William Schaefer in the Navy. They have attended our events before in the past. Hopefully they will come again. 1965 to 69. George Shelley, Air Force. Van Scheidt, Army. Dick Silk, Army. Don't give Dick the mic. I heard somebody say, don't give Dick the mic. I've made that mistake before. Bill Silver, Marine Corps, what a story he has to share. Bill Silver, 1969 to 1974. James Simmons, Chicago. Tom Simon, he was in the Army. Tom Simon, Air Force. Pamela Skanes, Army. George Skivington. George, you here tonight? You were in the Navy. Served on the USS John F. Kennedy. A.J. Smith, Navy. Al Smith in Brookfield, Connecticut, served in the Army. Grover Smith, Marine Corps. Grover Smith served in the Marine Corps 1963 to 1967. James Smith served on the USS Rowan. Another tin can sailor, James Smith, Navy. 1970 to 73. Randall Smith, Navy. Nancy Smoyer is another one of those donut dollies. She's in Alaska. She served in the American Red Cross 67 to 70. Richard Snyder served in the Army. Jack Snyder served in the Army. Jay Snyder served in the Army. Robert Sobosinski served in the Navy on the USS John F. Kennedy, 1970 to 1971. Robert Solo served in the Army, 1969 to 1972. Robert Solo. Jerry Sopko served in the Army in 173rd Airborne Brigade. Jerry Sopko. And Jerry let us know, I don't know if Jerry is here tonight, but Jerry let us know that State Route 173 was going to be dedicated in honor of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Very active brigade in Vietnam. On April 12th at the Slippery Rock Township Community Center. Edward Soros, Army. Lori Spada, Lori, Army widow. Lori Spada. Tom Spampinato, Army. Bill Spanos. Mark Spiridigliosi, Lancaster, PA, served in the Army. Charles Sprouse served in the Army. Bill Spych served in the Army. Ron Stakovich, Air Force, 1954 to 1958. Alvin Stein served in the Navy. Richard Stewart Jr., United States Marine Corps, 1966 to 73. Richard Stewart Jr. Norman Stroud. Marty Strosco. Oh, there you are. Joseph Sudol is in New York. He served in the Army. Jay Sukitz. It's Jay Sukitz with us tonight. He served in the Army 1967 to 72. Bill Swope served in the Marine Corps. Golf Company 27, 1968. Bill Swope. Anthony Talak served in the Army. Mark Tursick served in the Marine Corps. Shirley Thenns served in the Navy. Charles Timblin served in the Air Force. Andrew Toth served in the Marine Corps. David Bournet served in the Army. Daniel Troich served in the Air Force. Anthony Trozzi served in the Marine Corps. Uncle Bob Trumbauer served in the Air Force. Hello, Uncle Bob. He's online. Bruce Unks served in the Army. Bruce is here tonight. He served in the Army 1968 to 1970. Franklin Urim, Army. Dan Vaughn has ever been a prouder Marine than Dan Vaughn, who served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. Dan Vaughn, step on up here, please. Dennis Vernaccia served in the Army. Harry Vilsack is with us. Harry Vilsack served in the Army. He was married with 2 children when he served in Vietnam. John Boysick served in the Navy. John Boysick. John. William Wagner, Santa Maria, California, served in the Army. Wonderful memoir of his service with letters. Patrick Walsh, Navy, 1967, 1968. Patrick Walsh. John Weinheimer, United States Marine, 1966 to 1968. William Weiss, Navy. Carrie Wells, Navy, 1968 to 1970. Carrie. Rich Whiting, Army. Tom Whitten, Army. Carol Wynette, Army, 1965. Carol. Jerry Wyman, Navy, 1966 to 69, and then 73 to 96, retired Navy. John Wilson, Navy, 69 to 73, John Wilson. There you go, John Wilson. David Winwood, Navy. Dave Winwood, Navy. Is Alma Wisniewski with us? Alma Wisniewski, United States Marines. Alma, I haven't seen you in forever. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Don Wisniewski, maybe. Joe Wisniewski, maybe. Raymond Wolf, maybe. Larry Woods, United States Air Force. Station in Tuiwa. Don Yanuzo, Navy. Jennifer Young was a donut dolly in Vietnam. She's joining us from North Carolina. Mal Zelafro. Mal, are you with us? Mal Zelafro. Yes, good, Mal. Thank you for joining us. He's in a mobile advisory team. Ann Zeidel, Army. Ann is Ann with us? Ann Zeidel. Gary Zimmer, Army. Ed Zirkle, Army. Ed Zirkle. John Zulo, I'm sorry, John Zulo, Army. John Zulo, there you are. Robert Zist, United States Marine Corps. Danny Paul, Army, 1967 and 1978. Danny Paul, Army. Tommy Mascara, Army. Jim Frank, United States Navy. Jim Frank. DJ Brooks, United States Navy. Pierre Robinson, 101st Airborne Division. Pierre.
Brought the paper up, too.
Oh, Rob Farr. Yeah, we said Bob Farr.
I didn't hear you say.
Our last two veterans, Harry Van Riper and Rick Weber, will be coming up.
but this is our Memorial Day as well. So I would appreciate you remembering these folks that you lost from 1963 to 75. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. This concludes our program. I know Betty Goodman Klein, I'm sorry, I did not invite you up here to receive a pin. Please do come on up. Betty Goodman Klein, another one of our Vietnam veterans. Unfortunately lost in the shuffle. We are going to close our program with VBI retreating the colors. Taps, playing taps. And playing taps.
Okay, honor guard guys, coming up, get your flags, you know where they are. Let me ask you a question. All of you whose father served in World War II, raise your hand. I'll tell you, that's fantastic.
Can you pull the 50-50?
No use talking, it's my ticket.
All right, before we have the taps, the 50-50 is $447. The winning ticket is 809-5135. 809-5135. 5135. Okay, soldiers and sailors, the soldiers and sailors table is missing an artifact, a yellow pamphlet. If any of you have a yellow pamphlet, please do return it to the soldiers and sailors table. I got the button. I said it all the time. But
As loud as it'll go, and they go, how long have you been playing? And I said,
Rocky Flyer says to me, where'd you learn how to do it? He says to my wife, where'd you learn how to do it? She says, he knows how to press the button.
30-second delay, right?
3.
Oh, yours is 3. Oh, you gotta be quick.
Okay, will you please stand for the presentation of flags? Present, call. Order, hold. Order going. Fellas, carry. Forward, forward. All out.